What if the most feared missile in the world could be stopped by something that costs less than a cup of coffee to fire? Somewhere over a military base right now, a drone is screaming through the sky, and it's about to vanish without a single explosion. Before we go any further, hit that subscribe button like you're arming a defense system. Because once you understand what you're about to see, you'll want to be here for every single update on this story. Picture this. A small dot appears on a radar screen. It's moving fast, low, and it's headed straight for a military installation. This is not a random blip. This is an Iranian attack drone built to be cheap, built to be deadly, and built to overwhelm anything standing in its way. For years, this exact scenario played out again and again, and the defenders almost always had to spend a fortune just to stop it. But this time, something different happened. The drone didn't get hit by a missile. There was no fireball, no smoke trail racing up to meet it. It just stopped, mid-air, like it had flown into something invisible. And in a strange way, that's exactly what happened. To understand why this moment matters so much, we need to rewind and look at the bigger picture. This isn't a small, one-off battle. This is part of a long and brutal confrontation between Iran and its adversaries, a conflict that some experts are already comparing to the drone war that has been raging in Ukraine. Both sides have been using this as a testing ground, throwing their newest and most experimental weapons into real combat, something that almost never happens this openly. Normally, new weapons get tested quietly, on remote ranges, far from the public eye. But this war has turned into something else entirely. It has become a live, high-stakes laboratory where the future of warfare is being written in real time. For years, Iran built its entire military strategy around one simple idea: overwhelm the enemy with numbers. Instead of building a handful of expensive, high-tech weapons, Iran chose to build thousands of cheap ones. Drones that cost tens of thousands of dollars, not millions. The idea was simple but brutally effective. Send a wave of cheap drones first. Let the enemy's expensive defense systems burn through their interceptors, trying to shoot them all down. Then, once those defenses are stretched thin and running low, send in the real threat, the cruise missiles and ballistic missiles that actually do the damage. It's a strategy built on math, not firepower. Every time a defender fires a Patriot missile, a weapon that can cost several $1,000,000, to shoot down a drone that costs a tiny fraction of that price, the attacker wins the financial battle even while losing the physical one. Do that enough times, across enough drones, and eventually the defender runs out of interceptors or runs out of money or both. That was the bet Iran made. And for a long time it looked like a smart one. But bets like that only work as long as the rules of the game stay the same. And recently the rules changed completely. This is where the real story begins. Because the weapon that just changed everything isn't a missile at all, it's a beam of light. Multiple defense systems have entered this conflict, and they represent a genuine leap forward in how wars are fought. On the American side, there are two major systems worth knowing about. One is called HELIOS, the other is called ODIN. On the Israeli side, there's a system known as Iron Beam. All three of these systems share the same basic idea. Instead of firing a physical object, a bullet, a missile, a rocket, they fire a concentrated beam of energy. In simple terms, they are lasers. Now, forget what you've seen in movies. This isn't a glowing red line slicing across the night sky like something out of a sci-fi film. In most cases, these beams are completely invisible to the human eye. What they actually do is focus an enormous amount of energy onto a single, precise point on the target, holding it there just long enough to cause serious damage. The beam can burn through the outer shell of a drone, fry its internal guidance system, or in some cases, cause its warhead to detonate before it ever reaches its target. There's no missile chasing the drone through the sky. There's no smoke trail. The target simply stops flying, and sometimes it falls silently out of the sky. Sometimes, if the beam catches the explosive payload just right, there's a small burst high in the air. But there's no dramatic missile intercept, just silence and then nothing. And here's the number that should stop you in your tracks. A single Patriot interceptor missile can cost millions of dollars. A single shot from a directed energy weapon costs a few dollars. Sometimes it's genuinely just the price of the electricity used to fire it. Think about what that means. The entire economic strategy that Iran built its drone doctrine around, the idea that cheap mass production would always beat expensive precision defense, just got flipped completely upside down. Suddenly, the defender isn't the one running out of resources. As long as there's power and the system can stay cool, it can keep firing. Shot after shot after shot, for a cost that barely registers next to the price of a single missile interceptor. This is not a small technical upgrade. This is a fundamental shift in how mass drone attacks can be defended against. And it's a shift that Iran's entire strategy was never designed to survive. If you're starting to see just how big this shift really is, drop a comment right now with the word beam. I want to know how many of you had no idea this technology was already being used in real combat. So how did this actually play out on the battlefield? Reports indicate that both American systems, HELIOS and ODIN, along with Israel's Iron Beam, have successfully shot down Iranian attack drones during this conflict. Think about what a typical drone swarm looks like. Dozens of slow-moving, low-flying drones, all converging on a single target at once. In the old system, every single one of those drones forced a painful decision. Do we spend a multi-million-dollar interceptor on a drone that cost $30,000 to build? That question alone used to keep military commanders up at night. With a laser system, that agonizing math disappears. You track the target, you lock onto it, you burn it out of the sky, then you simply move the beam to the next threat in line, and you do it again and again. The only real limits are how fast the tracking system can find the next target, and how well the system can manage heat and power between shots. In practical terms, this is an air defense system that doesn't run out of ammunition the way a traditional missile battery does. Now let's talk about why this genuinely blindsided Iran, because this is really the heart of everything we're talking about today. For more than a decade, Iran poured enormous resources into building a military doctrine based on cheap mass production. Drones, rockets, missiles, all manufactured at a fraction of what it costs the United States or Israel to build comparable systems. The entire strategic bet was that expensive Western defense systems simply could not survive an endless wave of cheap threats without eventually running dry, financially or literally. And for years, that bet actually paid off. It worked against smaller regional powers. It strained defense budgets. It fueled real, serious conversations about interceptor shortages in previous conflicts. Iran had every reason to believe this strategy would keep working indefinitely. But directed energy weapons break that entire equation. The defender is no longer trapped in the same financial game. Iran spent over a decade building a strategy around forcing the other side to overspend, and now the very foundation of that strategy is cracking. Not because directed energy weapons are some brand new secret invention nobody's ever heard of, but because Iran's whole approach assumed the cost of every intercepted drone would always favor the attacker. This is the first time in a real sustained shooting war that assumption has been proven wrong in front of the entire world. There's a second part to this story that's just as important, maybe even more symbolic. It involves a drone called Lucas, which stands for Low-Cost Unmanned Combat Attack System. And the story behind this one is almost poetic when you really sit with it. At some point, American forces got their hands on a captured Iranian Shahed 136 drone. Not a photo of one, not a description of one, an actual physical airframe. Engineers took it apart piece by piece, studied every single component, and then rebuilt the concept as an American system. Same basic idea, a long-range one-way attack drone, roughly 10 feet long, cheap to manufacture, reportedly costing somewhere around $35,000, which is almost nothing by military standards, and capable of carrying an explosive payload that detonates on impact. And then, in a move that feels almost like poetic justice, the United States began using Iran's own drone design against Iran. A senior American military commander reportedly summed it up in a way that's hard to forget. This drone started as an Iranian design. American forces captured it, studied it, rebuilt it, and sent it right back into the fight, this time flying under American colors, aimed straight back at the country that designed it in the first place. Belief that only they could produce weapons this cheap, this fast, and at this kind of scale. Their whole theory of victory depended on the idea that the West could never match that pace or that price point. And now, the very design they created to overwhelm their enemies has become a weapon used against them, built at their own price using their own blueprint. This wasn't the only new system introduced during this conflict either. There's also the Precision Strike Missile, a longer-range, more powerful ground-launched weapon designed to eventually replace older systems. It reportedly made its first combat appearance during the same period, striking targets far. That's not just a tactical move. That's a message. Iran built an entire strategy around the OM hundreds of kilometers away, with far more precision and power than the systems it's replacing. There's also a new uncrewed surface vessel used at sea as part of these operations. Between laser weapons knocking drones out of the sky for pennies, a reverse-engineered drone turning Iran's own design against it, and brand new missiles making their combat debut, this conflict has become a proving ground where nearly every domain of warfare, air, sea, and ground, is being tested in real conditions, not on some quiet range far from public view. There's another layer to this that's honestly a little unsettling. Reports suggest that intelligence operations have started combining offensive cyber capabilities with artificial intelligence to help identify high-value targets, reportedly pulling information from traffic cameras and public camera networks to piece together the exact location of specific individuals. It sounds like something ripped straight out of a spy thriller, but increasingly, this kind of capability is becoming real, not fictional, because of how far artificial intelligence has advanced in recent years. This entire conflict isn't just about lasers and drones. It's a proving ground for the next generation of warfare across every category imaginable. technology, cyber operations, and artificial intelligence, all converging at the exact same moment in history. If this is starting to feel like something bigger than just a military update, that's because it is. Take a second right now to share this video with someone who still thinks laser weapons are science fiction. They need to see this too. Now let's talk about why this actually matters beyond the headlines, because there are real, lasting consequences here that go far beyond a single battle or a single conflict. The first and biggest shift is economic. For decades, the entire challenge of defending against missile and drone attacks came down to a brutal math problem. An attacker could build 10 cheap threats for the price of a single expensive interceptor needed to stop just one of them. That imbalance has shaped military budgets, procurement decisions, and entire national defense strategies for years. Directed energy weapons don't erase that problem completely. There are still massive upfront costs involved in building and deploying these systems, and there are real limitations we'll get into in a moment. But when it comes to the cost of each individual shot, these weapons take a wrecking ball to the old equation. If a country can defend against a mass drone attack for a few dollars per engagement instead of a few million, that changes how every single adversary on the planet thinks about whether a drone swarm strategy is even worth attempting anymore. The second major shift is about protection itself. Who gets protected and how? Whether it's a fighter jet in the air, a transport aircraft on a runway, or troops stationed at a forward base, the threat of a drone swarm or a missile barrage has always loomed as a serious, constant danger. Traditionally, defense against that threat has been limited by how many interceptors are physically available at any given moment. A laser system that can keep firing as long as it has power completely changes that equation. It means military bases, ships, and eventually maybe even aircraft themselves could have a far deeper well of defensive firepower than anything available in the past. But let's be fair here, because this technology isn't a miracle cure, and it would be dishonest to pretend otherwise. Directed energy weapons require enormous amounts of power and serious cooling systems just to keep functioning without overheating. That's a genuine engineering challenge, especially when you try to shrink these systems down for smaller platforms like fighter jets or compact ships. Weather is also a real factor. Heavy fog, dust storms, and rain can all weaken how effectively a laser beam travels and focuses on its target. Atmospheric conditions matter far more with directed energy than they do with a traditional missile. And there's a range limitation too. Right now, these systems tend to work best at short to medium range against relatively slow, low-flying threats like drones. They're not yet a full replacement for long-range engagements against something like a fast-moving ballistic missile in its final approach. So for now, this is a powerful complement to existing defense systems, not a total replacement. But even as a complement, even if it only solves the drone threat, that alone is a massive shift. Because drone saturation attacks were such a central part of Iran's entire military strategy. Beyond the technology and the economics, there's something deeply human buried inside all of this. And it's easy to lose sight of that when we're talking about beams and interceptors and cost per shot numbers. Every single drone or missile that gets stopped before reaching its target, whether that target is a military base or a place where ordinary people live and work, represents a life that might have been lost, but wasn't. A family that doesn't get that phone call, a base that doesn't lose personnel that day. Behind every successful intercept is the simple, quiet fact that someone gets to come home safe. That's not just an engineering win, that's a human one. And it's worth pausing here to acknowledge that Iran isn't standing still while all of this unfolds. Iranian officials have continued to speak openly about developing more advanced hardware, even in the middle of active conflict. There have been reports of new missile optimizations, accelerated drone development, and rapid adaptation under pressure. That kind of resilience shouldn't be underestimated. An adversary that can innovate quickly, even while facing real setbacks, remains a serious and unpredictable force. But the core problem for Iran hasn't changed. Their entire strategy was built around cost asymmetry, cheap mass production against expensive precision defense. Once the other side introduces a genuinely cheap, scalable counter, whether that's a laser system firing for a few dollars a shot, or a reverse-engineered version of their own drone built at their own price point, the foundation underneath that strategy starts to crumble. Iran can keep pushing forward on the offensive side, and they almost certainly will, but they're now doing it against a defender who is no longer trapped in the expensive game they were counting on. There have also been reports of Iran attempting an extremely long-range missile strike during this conflict, targeting something roughly 4,000 kilometers away from its own borders, a distance that genuinely surprised many defense analysts because it pushed far beyond what most people believed Iranian missile technology was capable of achieving. Some analysts have speculated that Iran may have adapted a space launch vehicle to reach that kind of range. According to reports, the strike didn't successfully hit its intended target. One missile reportedly failed mid-flight, and another was intercepted before reaching its destination. But the simple fact that Iran attempted a strike at that distance tells you something important. They are absolutely still pushing the boundaries of what their technology can do. Nobody should walk away from this thinking Iran is out of options. This is a genuine back-and-forth arms race playing out in real time, and every time one side reveals something new, you can be certain the other side is already working on a response. If you've made it this far, you clearly care about understanding how the world is actually changing right now, not just watching the headlines scroll by, so do me a favor and tap that like button. It genuinely helps this video reach more people who need to understand exactly what's happening here. Now, some of you watching this are probably thinking, wait a second, haven't we been hearing about laser weapons for decades? Isn't this old news dressed up as something new? And honestly, that's a completely fair question. Military researchers have been working on directed energy weapons in some form since at least the 1980s and 90s. There were experimental programs that tried mounting massive chemical lasers onto modified aircraft, hoping to shoot down ballistic missiles during their earliest phase of flight. There were ground-based systems tested at various points over the decades. And for years, honestly for most of that time, the story around laser weapons stayed remarkably consistent, promising in theory, impressive in demonstrations, but never quite ready for the chaos and unpredictability of real combat. The lasers were too large, too power-hungry, too fragile, or simply too expensive to deploy at any meaningful scale. It was one of those technologies that always felt like it was 5 years away, decade after decade after decade. So when we say this moment matters, we're not saying the concept of a laser weapon is brand new. We're saying this appears to be the first time these systems have been used successfully and repeatedly in a real, sustained shooting war, against real threats, actually performing the way engineers always hoped they eventually would. That's the real difference here. It's the leap from promising laboratory technology to combat-proven capability. And that leap matters enormously, because nothing proves a weapon system works quite like actual combat. You can run every simulation imaginable. You can test on every range you have access to. But until something performs reliably against a real adversary, actively trying to defeat it in real weather, under real operational pressure, with all the maintenance headaches that come with actual deployment, you simply don't know for certain if it's ready. And based on everything being reported, these systems are performing. Try to imagine, just for a moment, what it would actually feel like to be watching over one of these engagements as it happens. Picture sensors feeding a constant stream of information about incoming threats. In the old way of doing things, there's always this quiet background tension running through every decision. Are we going to run out of interceptors before the enemy runs out of drones? That's a real calculation commanders have had to make in recent conflicts. How many interceptors do we have left? How many threats are still inbound? Which targets do we prioritize? And which ones do we accept the risk of letting through? Now imagine that same scenario, except the base, or the ship being protected, has a laser system cycling through target after target with essentially no concern about running dry. That single change transforms the entire tempo and confidence level of an operation. Nobody's rationing resources out of desperation anymore. They're simply watching the system methodically work through the queue, one threat at a time. There's a broader lesson buried inside the story of that reverse-engineered Lucas drone too, something that goes beyond just this one weapon. In the past, if a military wanted to reverse engineer an adversary's weapon system, that process could take years. You'd need to acquire the actual hardware, transport it back safely, hand it over to engineers, take it apart piece by piece, understand exactly how it was manufactured, redesign around any parts that couldn't be sourced or weren't wanted, and then run the whole thing through rigorous testing and certification. By the time a new version was actually ready for deployment, the original adversary had often already moved on to their next generation system entirely. But what happened with Lucas suggests that entire cycle has compressed dramatically, reportedly captured, studied, rebuilt, and turned into an operational system, all while an active war was still unfolding, and priced competitively with the original Iranian design it came from. That is an extraordinarily fast turnaround for any weapons program in modern history. And it says a lot about how much things like modern manufacturing, rapid prototyping, and streamlined procurement for smaller, lower-cost systems have genuinely changed what's possible. What used to require years, working through a massive defense contractor's supply chain, can now, at least for smaller and cheaper systems, go from concept to combat deployment in a fraction of that time. Step back for a second and think about how quickly the entire character of warfare is shifting, right now, in our own lifetime. Arguably, faster than at any point since the introduction of jet aircraft or guided missiles decades ago. For most of modern military history, combat has fundamentally revolved around human pilots, human reflexes, and human decision-making, often under incredibly high speeds and incredibly high stakes. What's unfolding in this conflict points toward a battlefield where an enormous share of the actual fighting and defending is being handled by autonomous or semi-autonomous systems. Drones intercepting drones. Lasers silently shooting threats out of the sky. artificial intelligence helping identify targets before a single human even makes the final call. And increasingly, human decision makers are stepping 1 or 2 levels back from direct contact, directing and overseeing, rather than always being the very tip of the spear themselves. That's not necessarily a bad thing. In many ways, it's genuinely about protecting human lives, putting machines directly into harm's way instead of people whenever that's possible. But it is undeniably a different kind of warfare than what previous generations trained for, and it's reshaping what future military careers will even look like. The skill set required going forward isn't just about raw piloting instinct anymore. It's about understanding sensor fusion, autonomous systems, and the practical realities of directed energy weapons, alongside everything that came before. So here's the bottom line on everything we've walked through today. The introduction of reliable, effective directed energy weapons into a real, sustained combat environment. Not a test range, not a controlled demonstration, but an actual shooting war stands as one of the most significant developments in air defense in decades. It doesn't make drones obsolete. It doesn't make traditional missiles obsolete either. This remains very much a layered battlefield, one where lasers handle the cheap, high-volume threats, while traditional interceptors continue to manage the faster, more sophisticated ones. But what this moment absolutely does accomplish is eliminating the free lunch that cheap drone saturation attacks use to represent. For years, the math favored the attacker in a straightforward numbers game. That math just took a serious, undeniable hit. Every nation watching this conflict unfold, allies and adversaries alike, is taking careful notes right now, because everyone understands that what's happening here isn't theoretical anymore. It's real, it's proven, and it's reshaping the fundamental assumptions that entire military doctrines have been built on for decades. There's something genuinely remarkable about watching a technology that spent 30 years living inside defense magazines as a distant future possibility suddenly step out into the real world, into an actual war, and simply work exactly the way engineers always hoped it would. A weapon that costs a few dollars a shot is quietly rewriting rules that cost millions of dollars, years of strategy, and an untold number of lives to establish in the first place. And once a shift like this happens in front of the entire world, there's no going back to the way things were before. The age of cheap, mass overwhelming, expensive precision may finally be coming to an end, and what replaces it is only just beginning to take shape. If this video opened your eyes to something you didn't fully understand before, that's exactly why this channel exists. Subscribe, stay close, because the next chapter of this story is already being written, and you don't want to miss a second of it.